Hello and welcome. This is episode 11 of a talk series I'm doing. Last episode, we talked about a few things. We talked about some words and some ideas about life and how to approach it, and utopias. In this one, we're kind of continuing upon those same themes or lines. We're going to talk about probably leaning more about stuff about how to approach life. Let's make it clear, though. Now, personally, I definitely have ideas about more specific ideas about how I see the world or what I believe it to be, but I think it's good to reiterate that in this talk series, that yes, I do tend to gravitate to concepts, at least in a more general way. Well, because it's a talk series, right? There's a certain amount of, even though authenticity is also a big theme in this project, that well, for some things, it just makes sense to talk about things in a more general and universal way, because especially if it's some form of media or communication or whatever else that is meant to basically for it's put out for some kind of audience, whoever finds it or whatever else, right? So the thing is, if you're gonna talk about these kind of larger concepts and stuff in life, well, I mean, sometimes that being more general is useful, right? Because then it allows you to talk about things that apply to a lot of people, right? If you automatically say that, like, let's say you've got a very specific interest or of any kind of philosophy, religion, school of thought, aspect of life, right? That's really great. And there's a lot of people who find one very specific thing, and they really like to go really deep into it, right? But as I've said before, I like to operate on what I would call more of the base plate of how people see the world and how they feel in it and everything else, and that requires a little bit of generalness. So with that said, basically what I'm trying to impart here is that I talk about a lot of things, right? I talk about a lot of ideas, concepts, ways to look at things, and I don't go into an incredible amount of specifics of this or that, right? It's just because the more you go into specifics about every little thing you want to talk about, the narrower the audience becomes, or the less some amount of the audience will be able to relate to or find interesting about whatever is being said, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. People need to feel like another aspect of an ideal society is that people feel free to talk about many things and ideas and etc. Right? That's part of the reason behind the idea of free speech. It's one of the reasons why in Aldous Huxley's novel *The Brave New World*, that it's one of the reasons that the utopia was not actually that. It was, even though it was super efficient and clean and everything else, it was kind of like a dystopia because of the level of control needed in terms of how people communicate and their ideas and everything, right? So, got to be able to talk about things and ideas that people may have, or the larger questions of life, or that's part of feeling free, right? Is talking about larger questions, even though I will readily admit that's not something that I really like to talk about too much in actual life. I think when somebody has a question for me, or seeks, or has a very specific, or they want to have a discussion about that stuff, I'm usually all for it, right? But a lot of people, they consider it like whatever the biggest, largest picture is in life, or what the biggest questions are, that it's so far removed from their experience that, all it does is detract from it, or yeah, it gives them just some kind of existential anxiety or something, right? So it makes perfect sense that a lot of people don't like to talk about that all the time, right? But sometimes it can be interesting, because those questions are interesting, and there's a lot to them. So that's why this is a good format. It's a talk series. You can listen to it once. You can think about the stuff and how it makes sense or doesn't make sense to you. And then it's not like, well, yeah, so there you go. I don't even know if that was necessary. I just wanted to give a quick explanation about why I tend towards using terms that are more general and talking about things that are more general when we're talking about the larger questions in life. And there you go, right? Because it allows for more relatability, right? And it's probably just because I think about stuff that way, nothing against specifics and details and everything, but that's usually the point that I start from when I'm examining some kind of concept. I usually look at it from the top down, but not all the time. Obviously, if there's something specific, some little thing in life, you can think about that specific thing, and then use it to look at the principles and scale it up towards whatever situation. You could do that too, and I do it. But yeah, for a lot of things, I tend to start at the most general picture, because then, it's like filling in the edges. Like you got a puzzle, you fill in the edges and you get the shape of it first. And then when you're in the specifics, it's a lot, you've got this at least outline, this rough outline in your head of what things are, or what things may be. And it's a lot easier to, well, for me at least, it's easier to navigate the specifics when there's at least some kind of larger framework or something that you're aware of, or at least are operating from. So with that, let's dive right into it. We're going to start with a couple just general notes about some concepts in life. So let's get started into those. I had nothing incredibly specific in mind, but just a larger topic to explore, and that is the concept and relationship of truth and beauty. It's funny. Those are two of those words that are like they encompass so much. They're so powerful, but so broad. I've held those as a standard or as a priority in my life for quite a while, and possibly for the entire thing without even knowing it early on. But truth and beauty. So in order of the phrase, you could look at truth. Truth is a funny one. It can be when you think or perhaps overthink about things, about life, about all kinds of things. We can see that there are many forms of interpreting the world that make many things subjective, and so therefore that truth, it can be subjective, and it can also be objective, right? It could be either or it could be. There can be a sliding scale. I remember a long time ago. I was somewhere and I heard someone, they were making a joke. Somebody said something like, "Oh, that's somewhat true," and then the person says, "Oh, ah ha ha," like, "Oh, the sliding scale of truth," and it's like, well, that's not that funny, because there are some things that, like, truth can be a spectrum too. There are things that are somewhat true or somewhat false, right? That just means that they're on the spectrum of accuracy about objective reality. Some statements or perceptions are closer to objective reality, right? But it's depending on what context or how you phrase it, you can have things that are somewhat true or more true than other things, but not absolutely objectively true. How would that be? Well, definitely in the realm of a subjective opinion, right? Some people like cilantro. They say cilantro tastes great, right? Because it tastes great to them. And then they say something like 17%, it tastes like soap. So for that person, cilantro does not taste great, right? So that's two contradictory statements that are both true, depending on what individual, what their appreciation is for cilantro, right? But of course, there is the way to make that objectively true and just say cilantro is good it tastes good to some people and it doesn't taste good to other people, probably based on some kind of biological factors, right? And then you say, okay, well, that seems objectively true, right? Unless 17% of people are lying about not liking cilantro, or unless 83% are lying about liking it, right? So, but that doesn't seem very likely. So it seems that it's just subjective taste, right? That is obviously something that is subjective. When you're talking about something that is objectively true, usually things that are spoken about as being objectively true are things that are just very, very much further on the spectrum towards objective truth, but not absolute objective truth, right? And the best way to illustrate that is to use something that is largely looked at as subjective, and then illustrate how that it is, in fact, there is some objective aspect of that. And you can think of the easy one that comes to me is art, or that kind of stuff, media, or literature and things that are kind of subjective, but also there's a very objective quality about them, because you might say that, think of someone like the greatest things that are considered the greatest literature of all time. You got Dostoevsky from the Russians. He's right up there with Joyce, in my opinion, above in terms of quality of the experience of reading one of his novels. But there are plenty of people who would read it, like any of that stuff, and say, "Oh, that doesn't really do it for me. I'm not, I like this or this instead." And so that's, there's that subjective aspect of it. But then, because when you have large amounts of people who can recognize that, regardless of subject matter or content or whatever, there are definitely novels that they're just higher quality, right? They are higher quality, and so they're objectively, objectively more quality, and that's usually because the author has put more effort into it. Whatever kind of thing you're going for in a novel, whether it's a drama or examining the human soul, or a funny comedy, like action novel, whatever. Films, right? The exact same thing for films. But regardless of the subject matter or whatever, there's definitely a feeling when you experience something that, like, oh, that was quality. That there was a lot that went into that, or it was just, it's quality versus lower quality. Right. So let's just skip to the part where I say beauty and truth. Those are two things that have a significant overlap, right? Because a lot of truth is beautiful, and a lot of beauty is true. And yeah, if you were trying to think about it in, if you're being very general, you might even call those the same thing, right? But not really, because there's definitely things that are true that are perhaps not beautiful, and there are definitely things that are beautiful that are perhaps not true, in the most absolute sense of the term. But I mean, if you look at something, if you look at something like the idea of authenticity, the thing that I talk about quite a bit, living authentically, or just feeling authentic within yourself, that is a type of beauty, a beauty of truth. So I know there's a lot more to go on that. There's a lot more to explore there. Right. It was about another sort of concept, you would say, that's kind of, or a form of whatever, an expression. But it's the idea of why so serious, right? What were we going to explore about that? Yes. Let's start with it's not just that specific quote from the Joe. It's a larger kind of concept or aspect about an approach to life, or essentially, like, why so serious? The idea is, like, pretty obvious. Why do people take even small things in life, depending on the individual? Why do they sometimes take it so seriously, right? And I haven't really fleshed out exactly what my thoughts are on that, other than to say that I say that, yes, for the most part, life is somewhat more enjoyable when you have a little more levity in it, or treat it with a little more of levity. But there's a reason that people are drawn to take certain things seriously, or simply they just feel more serious about them, whatever that may be. It might be, some people get really serious about whatever work they do, right? They really want to make something, they really want to do it the best they can, or make something really great, right? And so that's a good thing. But yeah, just in terms of life, what's the idea there? Well, we were really going to try to explore that. So the just from the top of the head, you'd say that yeah, a lot of things do feel better when you're not so like everything doesn't seem heavy in a sense, and so that is a good thing to cultivate in yourself. But then how we like to do. We have to look at the other end of the spectrum as well to try to get the full picture. So if you could say on one end of a spectrum, it is basically treating life with the most amount of levity, or not taking things seriously. And on the other end is taking everything absolutely seriously, right? And the obvious answer seems to come to mind, which is, well, it's almost most definitely the correct, or the optimal way to approach life is somewhere in between those two extremes, right? But then the real question for everything, whatever you're talking about, is almost, all right, but where in the spectrum? So what you'd really want to do, if you could identify what things are better experienced when you take them seriously, and what things are become a worse experience if you take them too seriously, right? So the first thing that comes to mind, probably like social interactions. Especially if they're informal, those are probably the types of things that are more enjoyable if you don't take them as seriously, or you're not as heavy about things with that, because it's just more, it's just, who knows why, but I mean, I think that's pretty clear that people who seem to enjoy socializing and social events and interactions usually are not the type who take everything so 100% seriously and hang on every little word they say or other people say, etc., right? So that seems kind of obvious. And so the first thing that would come up that may be improved by taking it more seriously are things like whatever field of interest or career you're in, right? Because when you take it more seriously, you tend to perhaps maybe learn more about it, or push yourself in certain respects, and so then it becomes a more fulfilling or meaningful thing to you, if you take it seriously. And we're just scratching the surface. It seems like there's there could be a lot more there too, or at least somewhat more there to try to navigate. Yeah, but it does seem like it's definitely some kind of ratio or mix, and probably as we have found with so many other things, that it might just be one of those things that's better not if you don't think about it, because people will just naturally take some things seriously and some things not so seriously, without even thinking about it. And maybe that the way that whatever it is in the mind that does that, emotions probably have a little bit to do with that. But yeah, so maybe let that germinate for a bit. See if there's anything more to go on the spectrum of serious and not so serious. I guess it might also good to acknowledge that you can also take things in life as not really super seriously or heavy, but still apply yourself to things, right? So there is that difference of, you can take something seriously but still not feel like incredibly emotionally attached to outcomes or whatever else. And that's a good way to do it. I mean, yeah, I guess the point is just to offer some kind of rebuttal to this concept or approach to life that's just like, why take anything seriously, which is, we touched on that in the last episode about the kind of nihilistically jaded, right? And the reason you wouldn't want to become that way necessarily, where basically you don't take anything serious, it's that word, lethargy. If you don't take anything serious ever, you would be more prone to lethargy. And then life would start to lose its quality. Aha. So then I guess the way to approach that would again just be to take the things that you feel serious about in a sense, but to try to remain not so emotionally heavy or invested in it. Yeah, there's probably more that we could go on that. Yeah, that was it. We saw a question on the internet, and it seemed a little bit interesting because it's one that I've thought about before. Some guy is basically asking, is the will to power the ultimate motivation for most or all human beings? And that's, the reason that question is interesting is because, it's one of those things that could be both understood in a very broad and universal way, just the word power, right? Because now if you include everything that could be considered power or self-empowerment, then that includes just a vast amount of life, right? So if you were going to take it in the most narrow sense, that the will to power is just about having external power, right? But that's only one form of power. There's the idea of self-empowerment, which is just you're improving yourself in ways that you appreciate or something, or adds value to your life. So a lot of times power is put on a spectrum as the opposite of love, or the not really the opposite, because hate would probably be the closest thing to an opposite of love, or indifference. But power is often put next to love as either or, like would you rather have power or love, or that kind of thing, right? But then, even then, if you take the word very generally, you could say that even love is a form of power, because when you love things, or things love you, that might be a stretch. It is a form of power, I guess, but is the will to power the ultimate driving motivation for people? I think not. I think if you take that word pretty much, if you don't try to stretch the meaning of power to pretty much everything in life, right? If you look at the word as pretty much just generally kind of gaining more influence or command over your reality, I would say that is definitely nice to have, but I don't think it's the number one driving, motivating factor for all human beings. I think the will to basically achieve some kind of life that is the most fulfilling or the most ideal, whether people realize it or not, is ultimately what drives most of them. So even for some amount of the people, even for some amount of people who are driven towards more of, they look for leadership positions or leading groups or whatever, that even that may not be about the power itself, right? The power is just one aspect of some part of a reality they see in their mind that they think that they would be more fulfilled with, right? And in addition to that, or in contrast to that, I know and I have met many people in life who don't seem to have much of a, they don't seem to, they're kind of fine with whatever they're doing, and they don't seem to have any kind of really strong desire or need to, I don't know what you would call it, to gain more influence or anything. Like, there are plenty of people who seem like they enjoy their existence, and they try to do that the best they can. So again, it seems like I don't think the will to power is that big of a deal for a lot of people. There are just certain individuals, and yes, there's a good amount of that in me. You know, because you guys know me well. I constantly see how things could be better, regardless of whatever scenario that I'm in, or how whatever scale it's at, whether it's a very specific thing or a larger scale, more general aspects of society and life. So, yeah, I would say that, yes, I think I have that, and a little bit, but it's not like the 100% driving, motivating factor of my life. It's more, I would call it the will to creation. The will to creation is a more powerful drive than the will to power for me. The underlying mechanism there is just, it's a one tool or one way to try to effort to create a reality that the individual is more satisfied with, or enjoys more, or has more meaning, or whatever else, right? And so, what was that Dr. Viktor Frankl that we talked about in episode 10? he was talking about the will to meaning, right? So now we're getting a little bit where, it's a big, now we're, we got the will to power, we got the will to meaning, we got the will to creation. So those things seem more like that, depending on the individual, that it could change. I think a lot of people, at least a lot of people that I've met, they just seem to enjoy trying to figure out how to improve their lives and enjoy their lives more. And I think most people, the idea of power, they don't really think about it too much. They just think of it as if it would be like a kid in a candy store, and they just run around and do whatever they want. And if anything was possible in a dream reality or something, that probably would be possible. But what they don't realize is that when they think like that, really what they're wanting is to just, because it would be a lot easier to create or find a reality that they find very ideal. But that's my thoughts on that. Just what we're talking about, power and love. I think the will to love is probably a pretty big one that a lot of people have as well. So I don't think there is a will to blank, any word you put in there. I don't think there is one thing that would apply to every human being in existence, right? Everyone's got their own drives and motivations, and I think it is only a small percentage of people who really even have that driving factor to try to gain more power in some way. It's from what I definitely have that in me a little bit, but a lot of people that I meet don't seem to have that, right? They don't. They either just are not. They're more satisfied with whatever they're doing in their life or something. That's my thoughts on that. That you can't really put a blanket statement on any specific drive or motivation as if that's the one that everybody uses or everybody has, right? I think it's different for every individual. Some people are very similar in what they want, and others want completely different things. That's how I've always looked at it, and I think that is the case, right? Yeah, and if I'm being completely honest, I probably have a little bit of all of those. I have the will to power, I have the will to love, I have the will to create, and I have the will to meaning. There you go. It's the spectrum again. So that would be the short answer, the brief answer, without going into too much detail. I don't think the will to power is what drives most people, but I think there are certain individuals who have that more than others. That would basically be my answer to that. So thank you very much. Oh, right. So just to also include in the nutshell, that a lot of those, the will to creation, the will to love, the will to meaning, the will to power, all of those could probably more easily or be, all those spring from a even more even more universal description, is just the will to basically live a life and be in an environment that you really enjoy for whatever reason, whether it's a small community and you learn to really appreciate your people in that, or so basically if you wanted to find the closest thing to a blanket statement for what drives people, it would be the will to basically a fulfilling existence, an existence that has at least enough or an abundance of the things that whatever the individual has come to appreciate or find meaning in or enjoy in life, right? So the will to basically more fulfilling life, or a more interesting or challenging, or whatever else people like, whatever phase of life they're in, whatever they're looking for, that's usually what lies underneath the motivations for people, is that they're looking for some kind of experience that is somehow more fulfilling, even if it, and that could be a lot of different things. Some people like to just engage in a lot of fun and recreation and balance that with some kind of work. I mean, some people like to rise in the world and do all that. It's different for everybody. That's how I've always seen it. I do not think that there is one driving motivation that would apply to every single person. But the closest thing you could get to that was just say the will to a more fulfilling life or experience. That's kind of how I see it.
That was this is another voice note. I'm watching some guy. He's talking about philosophy. Heidegger. He is in a section of his discussion, and he's talking about time, which is interesting. That's one of the That's one of the themes, and To the Bone a little bit. This guy characterizes time in a poetic way. He says time is the horizon of our potentialities, which the way I understand that, he's basically saying, you can only do so many things, and that's why time exists. It's funny. I mean, I think that if people were perhaps trying to extract some kind of meaning out of the scene Into the Bone with the right. So the thing is, what I meant by that is more the concept of time causes people to, it makes it hard for them to basically be able to fully appreciate their life's day to day. And it's not time itself, it's all the bullshit and all the ways that time is used in a society that with all its flaws, right? It's not the idea of time itself, it's all the bullshit that surrounds it, like being nervous of being late to something, the fact that people are paid hourly, regardless of how much what they accomplish within some same amount of time frame, right? All these things about how time is kind of abused and misused in society. To mess with people's minds, to give them anxiety, worry, etc. Smashing the clock means essentially smashing the clock in your head. In other words, the thing that makes you worry that you're not doing enough all the time, or that you won't get to somewhere fast enough, or etc., 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 right? So that's the idea that. But how do I think about that in terms of how he's characterizing it? So the thing is, here's how I think about that. Time being the horizon of potentialities. In other words, a person could probably do many things in their life, but eventually the number of days or the number of hours, minutes, seconds, that will all be a factor in how much they do or how much they live their life, right? So that's all pretty solid. But again, it is the idea of, we think about this idea like potentialities and time. And here's the thing about that. If you talk about potentialities and time, so if your main way of thinking about time is by relating it to how much a person can do within whatever span of time, a lifetime or whatever, you have to, well, you don't have to, but if you consider the nature of the reality that you're in, that definitely affects, well, it affects almost everything. Because, I mean, I think the thing that's tripping me up is just this idea of if you thought about it the other way around. In other words, that, all right, let's try, how do we simplify this? Just walk up to some random person and say, what do you want to do in life? What are the big things you want to do? And just whatever, they want to become some famous artist or something, make a lot of money, travel the world, right? And then they go do that, but they're still alive, right? And so then after that, they would find something else to do. And then after that, they would find something else to do, right? So, and even though the things that they kept finding to do, whether that, I mean, and that's not just some little thing, like these could be huge things in life. It could be, first he wanted to become some accomplished whatever. Then he wanted to start a family, or then he wanted to travel the world, or like all these things. They would really have come about because time is going to pass either way, and people would rather be doing things that they want to or that they enjoy. Not necessarily that, like, it's weird to think about life in the sense of doing things, well, of, like, that is the purpose of life, a little, doing things, because no matter what a person says they want to do, once they get to do that, then they'll still do other things. So they'll constantly be looking for things to do or to fill their lives with until the moment that they die, right? It's not like this, life isn't this weird thing that's like, you ask some kid in high school, like, hey, what do you want to be when you graduate? And they say, well, I'm going to be a famous musician. I'm going to make a couple albums. And then when I do that, I'll automatically die because I did the thing that I wanted to. Like, that's not how it works. Like, people are given some amount of time, some amount of years, and they figure out the things that they like because time passes more enjoyably or more meaningfully when you're able to do the things that you like instead of sitting around and waiting for death or whatever else, right? So the things that people want to do, even though very important for life to be much more conducive to individuals being able to fulfill all the things they want to do in life, but that is not like the sole, it is not the reason that is underneath everything, right? Because the reason that is underneath everything is we exist, and so what? So now that we exist, what shall we do with ourselves, right? Because no matter what you do, nothing lasts forever. So as soon as you do what you want to do, you'll either have to do something else afterwards that maybe you want to do as much or a little less or whatever, or find something else you want to do more. I mean, it's this constant idea that trying to define life as by just these goals or whatever in society, but it's like, I don't know, man. It's so, even if you look at life on Earth as it is some kind of divine experience or whatever else, right? Still, you'd end up on Earth, and then, just like most people, through your younger years, you use those to kind of try to understand the world better, to figure out how to navigate it, and to kind of explore it and everything. And then, at a certain point in life, you start to form these larger ideas about what you want to do in it or with it, right? But you form those ideas because you're already there, you're already waking up, and it's better to live life when you're able to be active and moving towards something, or engaged with something, than it is to just not do anything, right? And so then you say the things that people do are a result of, because we're here, because they exist, right? People don't exist as a result of the things they want to do. People want to do things because they already exist, and they have to pass the time of life day to day somehow, and it feels best to do it when you're doing the things that you really want to, right? But that's not the reason you exist. Your consciousness was not formed because you wanted to go on a hike. You know what I'm saying? It's like the idea of defining life as these things that, like, these goals, but people don't even form goals until they're somewhat progressed through life, and then, even then, through their adult life, their goals can change depending on the individual. I mean, so all that stuff is a result of kind of just needing to find the best way to pass each day, and to build upon something that passing each day would become more fulfilling and more enjoyable, right? And and so with that, I think we can put episode 11 out. I would like to reiterate just a little bit, because we sort of speak about some larger ideas about life. Once again, I would suggest that people don't dwell on that kind of stuff too much, unless you have a real interest in it, right? I still am a big believer that life is more about living than it is about thinking, right? But sometimes, depending on the person, those two things can be very intertwined. But so what else to say about that is, yeah, basically, if you want, you can think about this stuff, use it to try to create either an internal or an external experience that makes more sense to you, or allows you to enjoy life more, right? And if any of these things really spark something in you, and you really find them interesting for some reason, well, yeah, sure, dive deeper into it. Look around. There's plenty of material out there, plenty of things that people have said, ideas, systems of belief, etc., right?
And ultimately, just like those last segments, you'd think that systems of belief and etc. They're probably between this or that. There are some that are closer to some kind of objective truth, but also that they probably going hand in hand with that. That essentially, those are also things that are, I think, meant to add to humanity and the experience of life, right? So, with that, we continue to look forward to all the great things in the future. Thank you very much.